this week, we were talking, and there is 1.5 feet of snow in Chicago where it is. We got that. Is that anything?
Thank you.
That's about a word of prayer.
Our gracious and loving God, may the words of my mouth and meditation of all of us be acceptable in your sight. O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
My first week of college, now that's not yesterday, that longer ago than I want to admit, but I remember I went to the dining service, and eating with my peer group of college students was a new experience for me, but not unlike going to a cafeteria style restaurant. So I went through the line, chose my food, and I carried it on a tray and got something to drink and sat down. Well, I had chosen iced tea to drink. And so as soon as I sat down, I poured a liberal amount of sugar in my tea because that's what I do. And I took several bites of food, and then I was going to wash it down with the tea, you know, like usual. And when I took a drink of the tea, I almost spit it on the person in front of me. It was the most awful tea I have ever tasted in my life. I thought, this is college tea? Ugh. Well, with the help of my table mates at the time, we figured out that some of my new college colleagues who had been there previously had poured salt in the sugar container, and that was what I put in my tea. After that, whenever I ate in a dining service, I always shook out a little of the sugar to make sure it did not have any salt in it. Today's gospel lesson is a passage taken from the Sermon on the Mount. The Gospel of Matthew, as Brother Bob told us. It also appears in the Gospel of Luke. The Sermon on the Mount takes place after Jesus' baptism by John, so it takes place early in his ministry. Jesus went up on the mountainside and began to teach his disciples. In the passage, Jesus talked about salt and light. He talked about these to describe the Christian life. In verse 13, chapter 5, Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth." Now, salt is a common addition to our diets. Salt makes things more palatable. Things taste better with salt, except iced tea. But we also need salt to live. Without it, we could not survive. Of course, too much salt, as we know, isn't good for us, but we still couldn't live without it. In verse 13, he continues, "If salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It can no longer be used for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot." Salt losing its saltiness is a bit confusing until we understand more about salt in the time that Jesus lived. In ancient times, salt was more than the stuff that sits in a shaker on our tables or in other containers. Not only is it used to flavor, it was used to preserve food, although that's true today as well. Small amounts of it was used in fertilizer. Another thing that it was used for was to help them cook in their ovens. Now, here's how. At this time, people used what they had for fuel. It wasn't wood, and it wasn't charcoal. It was manure, dry manure. And that way, that's what they had to use. And the way that it was ignited was to use salt to not ignite the fuel. Now, where did they get this valuable salt? Salt accumulated by the sea in piles. This was evident at the Dead Sea, as I understand it. These piles look like pillars, and the people of Jesus' time would take home these salt pillars, and these pretty much contain pure salt. But eventually, the part that got, when they got down low, the top part was pretty pure. But when they got down to the bottom and to the part that had sat on the ground, it contained dirt and impurities. Therefore, it wasn't as good as the salt on top. This was likely how the salt lost its saltiness, in Jesus' words. The pure salt on top would flavor food and preserve, even ignite ovens. The dirty salt mixed with impurities would not work as well. So when Jesus says to us, "You are the salt of the earth," he is saying that you are necessary for life. You are needed to make a difference in our world. He could also be saying, you are the igniters of the world. You are needed to ignite something, to get something started, to go out and get something going. Now in verse 14, Jesus uses another metaphor. He says, you are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, hides its light under a bushel basket. Light, like salt, is also essential for life. It is necessary for photosynthesis that grows the food that we eat, or all the green light that are the lungs of the earth, providing us with oxygen and eliminating carbon dioxide, and for managing our daily biological clocks. I love the way that Jesus compares the Christian life to salt and light. Notice the wording in the passage. Jesus does not say, you might be the salt of the earth, or you should be the salt, the light of the world, or even work hard to be the salt and light of the world. He says, you are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth. Now, this reminds me of the mystery books that I like to read. Just think about it. In a mystery, they talk about investigating the scene of a crime. We learn that whenever anyone walks into a room, we leave something behind. There is evidence that we were there. A fingerprint, a footprint, perhaps threads from our clothing. We leave something behind that makes it obvious that we have been there before. There's no denying it. There are no escape hatches. We were there. So when Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world, he is telling us, no matter where we go in this world, our presence will be known. our presence as individuals, our presence as a church will be known. So how do we want to be known? As salt, how will we savor the earth? As light, where will we shine? Now, I brought something with me. Here's a salt shaker. Now, we know that if the salt remains in the salt shaker, it's not going to change the taste of anything. It's not going to make a difference. It will not make a difference until the salt goes out of the shaker and onto the places that we need flavor or savor. There are people in our community and in our world who are in need. They need to taste help. They need to taste hope, to taste support. They need to taste encouragement. They need to taste love. And it doesn't take much, just a dash in some cases, to change the life of someone in need. The same way with light. Light isn't really needed in the daylight, but the time that it is needed is in dark places. It's when people experience shadow and darkness. Darkness like despair and want, hopelessness and illness. That's when our light is needed. People need our help to see the positive. They need to see hope and see a new way, see new life, see people who care, to see Jesus. As the salt and light of Jesus, we too need to venture out to care for people in need. Where are those places of need? Where are they in our community and in our world? Where might we lend our flavor? Where might we shine? Where might we ignite something? Where might we get something going? The season of Lent will be starting the last week of February, a time when our minds focus on fasting. In Isaiah 58, the passage that Gordon read for us, the people ask God, why humble ourselves, but you don't notice? And God, through the voice of Isaiah, answers, your type of fasting is not what I choose. What I choose is to loose the bounds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to share your bread with the hungry, bring the homeless poor into your house. When you see them naked, cover them. When you do these things, then your light will break forth like the dawn. In Matthew 25:35-40, we read, for I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you cared for me. I was in prison and you visited me. And the righteous will answer, when did we see you hungry and give you food, or thirsty, and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you as a stranger and welcomed you? Or when was it we saw you sick and in prison and we visited you? And the king will answer them, truly I tell you, just as you did it to the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. Jesus knew that he was light and shone in the darkness. Jesus knew that he was salt and added strong flavor. His life was lived for the world, and when we celebrate communion in a few moments and recall the salt and the light that he offers. Psalm 34:8 says, taste and see that we as a church have been called to be good for the world. Let others taste your saltiness, for you are salt. Let the world experience your light. Shine brightly in the world. Look beyond the walls of the church, and share your light and soul with all the world to see. Amen.